Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. President Trump is working to decrease the nation's dependence on foreign imports. He signed an executive order to guarantee essential medical products are made in America. New York's Attorney General filed a lawsuit against the National Rifle Association. She claims the group is illegally handling funds, but the NRA says it's a political attack against them ahead of the 2020 election. Georgia's governor signs a new law aiming to protect police officers and other first responders. Protestors challenge the NBA to stand with Hong Kong. The organizer wants to see a statement from the league, but also from LeBron James to show they're getting on board with the movement. The chief investment officer at the largest U.S. pension fund resigns. He's been accused of falsifying documents and having ties to the Chinese Communist Party. And a Wuhan plague of a different kind is causing trouble in the U.S. Most of the fentanyl that appears in American street markets originates from the Chinese city. President Trump signed an executive order meant to free the U.S. from dependence on China for medical supplies. The legislation will make sure that medicines, medical supplies, and equipment are made in the U.S.
President Donald Trump signed an executive order in Ohio to ensure that medical supplies and equipment will be made in the United States and not in foreign countries. The executive order won't just cover medicines, but also medical supplies such as masks, gloves, goggles, and medical equipment like ventilators. Trump said that the CCP virus pandemic has brought awareness to the danger of China and other countries denying the U.S. essential products when it needs them most. He says the executive order will reduce the U.S.'s dependence on other countries for manufacturing.
We're going to bring them home where they belong, and we'll end reliance on China, just like we did with the washers and dryers, just like we did with many other things. We'll be making our product here safely, beautifully, and inexpensively.
According to a White House advisor, the executive order has three components, which include the Buy American order to ensure that government agencies buy American products. Another component is easing rules for the development of advanced manufacturing facilities in the United States. Putting the order into effect also intends to increase government demand for U.S.-made products. This will help create a market for manufacturers to invest and to produce in the United States.
Ohio Governor Mike DeWine tested positive for the CCP virus just hours before he was scheduled to meet President Trump. The office of the Republican governor said DeWine took the test as part of the standard protocol before meeting the president. After touching down in the state, Trump said he wishes his very good friend the best, and DeWine will be tested again and go into quarantine. New York's Attorney General filed a lawsuit today against the National Rifle Association with the goal to dissolve it. The AG says the NRA executives grossly mishandled funds, but the NRA says the lawsuit is a transparent attempt to score political points and a premeditated move. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
The National Rifle Association, or NRA, fights to defend Second Amendment rights and is the largest and most influential pro-gun organization in the nation. Attorney General Letitia James filed a lawsuit to dissolve the organization on the basis that it diverts millions of dollars away from the organization's charitable cause and is funneling them towards personal use.
The NRA's board's audit committee was negligent in its duty to ensure appropriate, competent, and judicious stewardship of assets by NRA leadership.
The lawsuit charges the whole organization and 4 executive members with failing to follow local and state laws, which the Attorney General claims resulted in a $64 million loss for the NRA. We reached out to the NRA for our response, who told us they've gotten more than 1,000 media inquiries since the lawsuit was filed. The NRA CEO told us in a written statement that, quote, "The NY Attorney General's actions are an affront to democracy and freedom." And on Twitter, the president called the move a political attack coming just in time for the 2020 election. The NRA has in turn filed a lawsuit against the Attorney General on the basis that she used the political prosecution of the NRA as a central campaign theme when she ran in 2018. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
In a statement, the NRA told us they are ready to fight the case because they are well-governed, financially solvent, and committed to good governance. And on Capitol Hill, the acting Secretary of Homeland Security defended the presence of federal agents in Portland, Oregon. He told an oversight committee that federal officers did not get the same cooperation that they can expect anywhere else in the country. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more details on how federal officers are responding to violence in Portland.
The DHS secretary told senators that violence in Portland is going down, but he says it could have happened sooner if the federal and local police were allowed to coordinate their efforts earlier.
We knew the violence would decrease, and it has. Unfortunately, it took till day 60. It should have occurred on day 2 or 3.
In July, Portland City Council banned the local police from cooperating with the federal police to quell the violence.
Local and state officials did not allow local law enforcement, to police the area immediately around the federal facilities, nor in the parks nearby, which violent opportunists used as a staging ground to prepare for their nightly assault on the courthouse and our officers. Local and state officials did not allow law enforcement to make any arrest, I repeat, any arrest, if the violence was directed at federal properties.
If the violence is directed at the federal courthouse, the local and state police do not engage. And Wolf says this is what makes Portland's months-long violent attacks different than any other city. Wolf says his agents have sustained a total of 277 injuries there.
Mr. Wolf, have you spoken with former Secretaries Ridge and Chertoff? Do you agree with them that DHS should seek to de-escalate tensions when in the field instead of increasing them?
Absolutely. We absolutely have to de-escalate. A lot of the training that Federal Protective Service, as well as the specific assets that we sent to Portland, are trained on de-escalation techniques. A lot of what we do, when you look at a 5-hour period every night, we are inside that federal courthouse 90 to 95% of that time. We only come out when there are fires being set, when there's enough individuals there, when there's thousands. We've seen anywhere from 500 to 5,000 individuals on that fence line.
He assured that all 99 arrests the federal officers have made have been both on federal property or within 2 to 3 blocks of it. Wolf repeatedly made clear that the DHS is responding to violence, not peaceful protests.
Because what is occurring in Portland and what's being reported by the mainstream media are two different things that are going on.
He says they usually see the peaceful protesters during the earlier evening hours, but from midnight to 5 a.m. is when the violence happens. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Some senators are also concerned about claims that the federal officers wear unmarked uniforms. Wolf denied the claim and showed photos of the uniforms that they wear. But he says they don't wear name tags because some officers and their families have been targeted in the past. And in Georgia, the governor signed a new law which aims to protect first responders. He says we should protect the men and women who risk their lives to protect ours.
Given the favorable
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed a new law pushed by Republicans that strengthens legal protections for police officers. It also provides additional criminal penalties for those who target officers. The bill criminalizes what it calls bias-motivated intimidation against a police officer, firefighter, or emergency medical technician. Under the measure, individuals who kill or seriously harm first responders can face up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $5,000. The crime also applies to individuals who cause damage to first responders' property worth more than $500. Critics have said the bill is out of step with nationwide efforts to make officers more accountable for their actions. Kemp says he signed the bill because he's attended too many funerals of officers killed in the line of duty.
American Thought Leaders host Jan Jekielek sits down with Colorado Congressman Ken Buck. They discuss what's happening on the streets of Portland, Oregon, and other major U.S. cities, the violence and calls for revolution, and what's at stake for the nation. Representative Buck has a new book out that sheds some light on this topic and others. It's called Capital of Freedom: Restoring American Greatness. Here's part of that interview.
So one of the interesting things you actually also talk about in the book is that, you know, some of these ideas of multiculturalism, diversity, tolerance, and so forth, these are actually all good values ostensibly, but these are somehow being used to undermine this actual tolerance that you were just describing.
Sure. So I think that the left is very talented at taking words that you and I believe have one meaning and completely changing the meaning. For example, Antifa stands for anti-fascist. They're one of the most fascist organizations that's been in America in our history. They are created to prevent speech that they find objectionable. That is a hallmark of fascism. The idea that we need to be more tolerant. What the left means by that is you need to accept our version of the world. It doesn't mean we have to accept your version of the world. Tolerance only runs one way. We know that tolerance works both ways. Judge certain actions based on the result. Don't just prejudge something as good or bad. And so the left has co-opted language and used it in a way that really fools many Americans, and it's sad because the most tolerant people in this country are Christians, and for some reason they have been deemed to be haters. If you think about what our command is from our God is to love our neighbor. Our commandment is to love our neighbor. That completely runs contrary to what the left is trying to portray as the Christian spirit.
You can watch the full interview on American thought leaders coming up tonight at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. The episode also repeats Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And protesters in New York City are challenging the NBA to show support for Hong Kongers and the persecuted Uyghurs in Xinjiang. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more from NBA headquarters.
Outside of the NBA's headquarters, Reverend Patrick Mahoney says no one in the NBA has condemned the human rights violations in China.
Not one team owner, not one general manager, not Commissioner Silver. No one has spoken out in a league which prides itself on being committed to social justice, has spoken out against these atrocities by the Chinese Communist Party against their own people.
So Mahoney challenged the NBA during the live stream protest to stand with pro-democracy Hong Kongers and the persecuted Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Last year, the NBA got itself into hot water after apologizing to China over a tweet by the Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey. That tweet said stand with Hong Kong, so the NBA's apology didn't sit well with some of their fans. Chris Slattery, a New Yorker and Knicks fan, says it's time for a boycott until the NBA makes some changes and shows it's concerned with China's human rights abuses.
I want to see knees. I want to see demonstrations. I want to see threats to cut back all their entertainment to the Chinese people. I want to see some substantive changes from the NBA.
One thing Reverend Mahoney said he wants to see is the NBA to stop doing business with communist China. But two people told us they think it's all about money.
So do you think the NBA should have business with China?
Of course. It's all about this right here.
It's all about money, man.
It's all about this.
If it ain't about the money,
you gotta stay.
Another man told us that the NBA should stand with Hong Kong, but said it's not only about the sports league.
Well, I don't think it's just the NBA. I think it's anyone. It's baseball, it's soccer, it's the UN. Like, why isn't the UN putting more pressure on China about what's going on in Hong Kong?
Mahoney wants to see the NBA release a statement that it stands with Hong Kong. He said he's also going to make a video for LeBron James with short stories from people suffering from human rights abuses in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
The State Department is lifting its global Level 4 health advisory. The warning urged Americans to avoid international travel in the midst of the virus pandemic. But Americans should still exercise caution when traveling abroad. Several areas in the Caribbean and Mexico are welcoming American tourists again as airlines add to their flight rosters. But Canada and the European Union have imposed strict restrictions on U.S. travelers. And coming up next, people entering New York City by train from out of state are now being screened. It's another way the city is enforcing the governor's executive order to quarantine. And a nurses' union is speaking out about not having enough PPE at a veterans hospital. But the hospital says it has an adequate supply. More on these after the break.
大提琴不仅仅是一件乐器，它是有生命、有感情的，需要我们精心的照顾。往往我们一个小小的动作，可能都会对人情绪产生微妙的影响。天音的品牌是福星，我们对传统的理念很荣幸被神韵艺术团选为指定供应商。时间是酿造音色的不可替代的陪伴。我跟大提琴已经有60多年的友情了，每一把琴都有它自己的个性，熟悉它，才能真正发挥它的潜力。所以，我希望给你的每一把琴，都是首先我所信任的。
New York City is now intercepting travelers coming in by train from out of state. City employees at Penn Station are handing out flyers, taking down information and telling them to quarantine. They must stay at home or in a hotel for 2 weeks. And if they don't, they could face a $10,000 fine. Our reporter Kevin Hogan brings us more about travelers' reactions to being screened.
We're here in Penn Station, New York, where Amtrak travelers coming from out of state are being told to quarantine for 14 days. Employees from the Public Engagement Unit are educating people on the rule, and they say they're here to help. The city will provide taxis, hotels, food, medicine, and even legal support for people quarantining. The city will also provide eviction prevention and help negotiating with employers if they have a problem with people working from home. The COO of New York City's Health and Hospitals, Chris Keeley, says the city will also help them get tested.
And if they need resources like getting a COVID test, we'll get them connected with a COVID test. If they test positive, then we would absolutely do contact tracing on them, just as we do for anyone in New York City that tests positive for COVID.
Keeley says he's having great conversations with people coming in and that passengers have been positive and responsive.
You guys were fabulous. I mean, the website was great. It was really informative. I wish every state was doing this.
After people give their information by filling out the form, the city may contact them by phone, text, or even knocking on their door to say hello. Tim and Donna are coming from South Carolina, and they don't see the screening as an inconvenience and plan to go through with the quarantine while they visit their family for a few weeks.
They weren't forcing you to stop. Some people walked by, some people, just use your head, common sense, and it's not that offensive.
Other travelers aren't as concerned about quarantining. Do you plan to quarantine? No, I'm good. Do you plan to do the quarantine that they're recommending?
Everything is good. I just came from Savannah. Everything is fine.
Passengers on trains coming from D.C., Boston, Rhode Island, and Maryland are being screened, but the city has put a focus on trains coming from areas where community spread is high, such as Miami. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
A nurses' union is calling for more PPE at a veterans hospital in New York City. The nurses say they only have a fraction of the N95 masks they should have. They're calling on President Trump to invoke the Defense Production Act to have a larger supply of masks made in the U.S. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
That they don't have the proper PPE for us.
Nurses at the Veterans Hospital in Manhattan that services the tri-state area are pleading their case to get the PPE they say they need. They demand more high-quality masks be made in the USA to keep the staff safe while they care for patients during the pandemic.
We need the president to authorize the Defense Production Act so that we can get enough proper protection so that we can care for the patients that are being given to us.
The nurses said the shortage has caused them to wear one N95 mask for a whole week when they're supposed to be replaced for each patient. Nurse McGrath said they can't care for patients properly due to the PPE shortage.
We just want to be able to properly take care of the veterans. They serve this country, they deserve the best care possible in the nation.
Not only that, but the nurses are unhappy with the new N95 masks they've been supplied with. The new ones don't have the metal rib that creates the seal around the nose. The nurses said they can smell the air in the room, but you shouldn't be able to smell through the mask.
I'd rather have this because I know it's secure.
The union local president is concerned that when teachers go back to work in the fall, they'll need N95 masks too. That would create an even bigger shortage. McGrath said the number of virus patients has gone down, but they want to be prepared for another surge.
But when it was full blown, it was a mess. It was a mess when it was full blown. We want to be prepared for the next surge that's supposed to be coming down the pike.
The nurses report a lot of staff have been infected with the virus, and some attribute that to not having proper PPE. They want the Manhattan Veterans Affairs Office to buy the same masks as those in the Bronx, and one nurse says money is the reason they're not getting them.
What does it come down to? Money, and they want to try to do the cheap way out of things rather than the right way. They try to.
The VA hospital responded by saying their employees have performed well throughout the crisis and have provided life-saving care to hundreds of veterans. They said the VA's PPE practices have helped limit the staff's infection rate to about 0.1% of the workforce. They report all employees are provided with proper PPE as per CDC guidelines, and they say the facility is stocked with enough PPE for their current demand. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
Still to come, 2 document-shredding trucks were seen parked in front of the Chinese consulate in New York. That's after the Chinese consulate in Houston was closed and documents were burned. And a different type of plague from Wuhan is wreaking havoc in the U.S. But this time, it's a drug, not a virus. Find out more about its dangers when we return.
He ascended to the throne during the most turbulent times in the Joseon dynasty. Despite that, he treated his people well, had great ambitions, and led the country towards a new renaissance. That eventually earned him the title as one of the wisest kings in Korean history. Lee Sun on NTD America.
This week on China Uncensored, the Vatican hacked, Chinese students kidnap themselves, and a communist power struggle threatens to bring down Xi Jinping. Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NTD America.
5,000 years of Chinese music and dance in one night.
Just so inspiring. It makes me want to go dance.
Breathtaking, brilliant.
It's out of this world.
Chinese consulates in the U.S. seem to be on thin ice after the one in Houston was ordered to close. Mobile paper shredding trucks spotted outside the Chinese consulate in New York are now raising questions. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
The Chinese consulate in Houston was recently ordered to close. That's after the Trump administration accused it of being a hub for espionage activity by the Chinese Communist Party. So what about the other Chinese embassies or consulates across the U.S.? On Thursday, we saw 2 trucks from a document destruction company in front of the Chinese consulate in New York. Over 10 trash containers filled with shredded paper were loaded onto the trucks. Around noon, one truck came. It's from USA Shred, a company that professionally shreds papers and documents. Workers were seen dragging trash containers to the truck. When our photographer managed to take a closer look, he found paper inside the containers. Workers continued dragging more and more containers to the truck. Later, a second truck came. The process lasted for at least 2 hours until our photographer left around 2:30 p.m. During the operation, a Chinese man was seen on the site who appeared to be an embassy member. He spoke with the workers from the shredding company. But when he noticed our photographer, he called a guard. After talking to the man, the guard approached our photographer and tried to get him to leave. Bystanders who were protesting there against China's human rights violations told us that yesterday they saw vehicles from the shredding company parked in front of the consulate. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid, once killed more than 30,000 people in a single year in the U.S., and the crisis is still going on. Most of the fentanyl in the U.S. street markets originate in Wuhan, China. Most of the fentanyl on U.S. street markets originates from China. The regulatory system doesn't effectively police a country's pharmaceutical and chemical industries. That's according to a recent RAND analysis. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid and has quickly become America's most dangerous drug. According to the CDC's 2018 data, more than 30,000 people in the U.S. died after taking fentanyl or one of its close chemical relatives. No other drug in modern history has killed more people in a year. Just 2 milligrams, enough to cover Lincoln's beard on a penny, can prove fatal. Over the past decade, Wuhan has emerged as the global headquarters for fentanyl production. The city's chemical and pharmaceutical manufacturers hide their drug production within their larger legal manufacturing operations. According to a recent ABC News report, huge amounts of these mail-order fentanyl components can be traced to a single state-subsidized company in Wuhan. Chinese manufacturers export the drug in 2 ways. Either they send shipments directly to the U.S. via American Postal Service, UPS, and FedEx using the dark web to process orders, or they ship fentanyl and precursor chemicals to drug cartels in Mexico. The final product is then smuggled into America. Ben Westhoff is the author of Fentanyl Incorporated. When he started his research on fentanyl precursors, NPP and 4-ANPP, he found these chemicals were all over the internet. And he discovered most of the companies selling fentanyl precursors are under the Wuhan Yuancheng Group umbrella. Westhoff believes that Wuhan Yuancheng sells more illicit fentanyl precursors than any other company. He then spent a year disguised as a potential customer and kept contact with 17 of Yuancheng's salespeople. He even paid its Wuhan headquarters an in-person visit in January 2018. When Westhoff inquired about their products, a Yuancheng saleswoman named Alyssa told him the company provides food additives officially, steroids and 4-ANPP, NPP underground. Another salesperson, Chen Li, said our products are sold to the United States less often, adding that more is sold to Mexico. Westhoff met Ye Chunfa, the chief of the company, at the Wuhan headquarters. He had told him that the company has 30 branch companies in China. In February 2019, Westhoff called Ye and revealed his identity as a journalist. Ye did not deny selling fentanyl precursors, but said through an interpreter, anything that the country schedules, we don't sell. As long as it's scheduled, we won't sell it. If it's not scheduled, we can sell it. He feigned ignorance about selling unscheduled fentanyl precursor chemicals. Westhoff then asked him why Yuan Chun mailed some of its chemicals in disguised packaging, an effort to evade customs. He then went silent. Westhoff concludes the only reason the company buys the ingredients from China is because it's easy and cheap. But the results have been tragic. A chart from USA Facts shows that 8 times more overdose deaths were attributed to fentanyl between 2013 and 2017. The Trump administration has urged Beijing to police fentanyl. Despite Chinese leader Xi promising that the illicit exports would stop, they didn't. The regime's negligence, if not intentional malice, remain contributing factors to the drug's harm.
Chinese netizens are laughing at a poster designed for the People's Liberation Army Day celebration. The holiday aims to show gratitude to China's military for safeguarding the country. But the poster has sparked humor because none of the aircraft carriers or warships pictured actually belong to China.
A Chinese real estate corporation designed a poster in celebration of PLA Day, which falls on August 1st. Directed towards the Chinese Army, the poster reads, "Thank you for your protection. We have a home and a world." Yet the aircraft carriers and warships that appear in the poster don't belong to China. Instead, they're from the U.S., France, Britain, the Netherlands, and Italy. A netizen posted the image on Weibo with a comment asking sarcastically, "Doesn't the U.S. aircraft carrier fleet look near and dear?" American Chinese media outlet The New Heights conducted an online poll earlier this week on Twitter among only Chinese users. It asked, if the U.S. is determined to overthrow the Chinese communist regime, do you plan to side with the U.S. military or the CCP's army if war breaks out? Results show that more than 80% of voters chose to stand with the U.S., while only 8% said they'd help the CCP. 10% remained neutral. A 2018 survey from Chinese web portal NetEase posed a similar question to people in China. The survey asked, how much will you donate to your country in the case of a war? And the pinned reply says, I will donate $1,000 to the U.S. Someone else also replied to the comment, writing, I agree with you, and I'll send information to the U.S. Army.
Up next, the chief investment officer at the largest U.S. pension fund resigns. He's been accused of falsifying documents and having ties to the Chinese Communist Party.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
The investment chief at the largest U.S. pension fund, CalPERS, is resigning. CalPERS didn't give a reason for his resignation. He's only been there for 18 months. But just a few days ago, he was accused of falsifying documents. NTD's Phil Zhou is following it.
Ben Meng, Chief Investment Officer of the largest U.S. pension fund, the California Public Employees Retirement System, or CalPERS, has resigned. CalPERS manages around $400 billion in pension and health benefits for millions of California public employees and their families. The sudden departure comes days after the Naked Capitalism blog accused Meng of falsifying financial documents, and it pointed out CalPERS' failure to review the documents or make Meng correct them. We spoke to compliance expert Tom Fox, who says both parties are at fault in this.
It's his fault for having the conflict of interest, number one. Number two, CalPERS' fault for not reviewing the forms and making a determination that he's inappropriate because of this potential conflict of interest. By owning or having an interest in any of the private equity firms where CalPERS might be investing funds, that's a clear conflict of interest.
In a previous interview, hedge fund manager Kyle Bass said Meng is actually a member of the Chinese Communist Party.
Ben Meng, that's the CIO of CalPERS, is part of the Thousand Talents program and a member of the Chinese Communist Party.
Bass says he's not sure where Meng's loyalties lie and that things need to change.
He was the deputy director of China's currency administrator. You don't get a top 5 job in China unless you are part of the party elite. He somehow, some way, has weaseled his way in to be the CIO of the largest pension fund in the United States, and he is shoveling dollars to China.
Earlier this year, Congressman Jim Banks wrote a letter to California's governor. He asked for an investigation to Meng's misappropriation of pension funds into Chinese companies and his relationship to the Chinese Communist Party. Banks tweeted, "Now would be a good time for CalPERS to drop their investment in the PLA and CCP. Americans shouldn't be investing in our biggest adversary's military." In a release statement, CalPERS didn't say the reason for the chief's departure and that it will immediately search for a permanent successor.
Over 1 million signed up for unemployment benefits last week. It's the 20th straight week the figure's been over 1 million. It means businesses are still cutting jobs as the economy struggles to recover.
Nearly 1.2 million American workers filed new jobless claims last week as the enhanced $600 weekly unemployment benefit expired. Meanwhile, the total number of people claiming jobless benefits in all of federal and state programs rose by 1.3 million, bringing the total number of Americans collecting unemployment to over 32 million. It comes as top congressional Democrats and White House officials remain deadlocked on a new relief bill. Negotiations head toward an end-of-week deadline, with little sign of an agreement. President Trump said he might have to step in if there's no deal, because the pandemic is not the fault of American workers.
In the meantime, my administration's exploring executive actions to provide protections against eviction, as well as additional relief to those who are unemployed as a result of the virus.
Following the lockdowns, the unemployment rate shot up from a 50-year low of 3.5% in February to 14.7% in April. Thursday's unemployment numbers follow reports from the Institute of Supply Management, showing overall business activity in manufacturing and services growing, but employment shrinking. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said the key to a sharp V-shaped economic recovery is to reopen businesses and avoid another lockdown.
President Trump says his administration is drafting an executive order to extend certain safeguards. That includes a payroll tax cut, eviction protections, unemployment extensions, and student loan repayment options. And average rates on long-term mortgages fell again this week. It's the 8th time this year that rates on the 30-year loan hit a record low. Freddie Mac says they dropped to 2.88%. That's down from 2.99% last week. It's the lowest level since Freddie started tracking them in 1971. The rate averaged 3.6% just a year ago. The average rate on the 15-year fixed-rate mortgage also fell. It dropped to 2.44%. That's down from 2.51% last week. And up next, French President Emmanuel Macron visited Beirut. He was mobbed by people calling for political reform. And British government finally allows a group of beavers to live naturally in England. More on these after the break. Over to Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron is the first foreign leader visiting Lebanon's blast site, and he is calling for the former French colony to have political reform. NTD UK's Neil Woodrow will bring us news from Europe.
Thanks and welcome to our UK newsroom with UK and European news. French President Emmanuel Macron offered France's support for the Lebanese people while visiting Beirut.
Macron is the first foreign leader to visit Lebanon after the massive blast on Tuesday. He met Lebanese President Michel Aoun and Prime Minister Hassan Diab. Before the meeting, he visited the site of the blast and nearby shattered streets while surrounded by crowds of emotional people.
We will bring food and material to rebuild homes, but what is also needed here is a profound political change.
Crowds shouted, "Revolution, revolution." Even before the pandemic, Lebanon was suffering from a severe economic crisis leading to mass anti-government protests. Macron promised more support from both France and on a European level, and that he would engage in frank dialogue with Lebanon's leaders over reforms.
It's a political, moral, economic and financial crisis, the first victim of which is the Lebanese people. It requires reactions extremely quickly.
Lebanon was a French colony, and France has long sought to support it. France has sent emergency aid since the blast, but is worried about corruption and has pressed for political and economic reforms.
The Hong Kong government has denounced a UK parliamentary report that slams the actions of Hong Kong police. The report looked into human rights abuses by Hong Kong police against humanitarian and medical workers from 2019 onwards. They found aid workers were subjected to intimidation, harassments, threats, physical violence and arrests. This meant injured protesters were delayed or stopped completely from receiving treatment. The aid workers were not involved in any hostilities, says the report. One recommendation is for the UK to urgently impose Magnitsky-style sanctions on individuals responsible for permitting the excessive police violence. This should include Chief Executive Carrie Lam and the Police Commissioner. Moving on, the head of the Bank of England says he's not currently considering negative interest rates.
Bank Governor Andrew Bailey made the comments in an interview with CNBC. That was right after the bank's Monetary Policy Committee voted unanimously to keep benchmark interest rates at an all-time low of 0.1%. Negative interest rates, first introduced in the 1990s, are used under extraordinary economic circumstances. Bailey says they can be useful to have in the toolbox.
It's actually it's doable and it's been done. A lot of continental Europe obviously is in that position at the moment, so it's not that it can't be done.
Instead of receiving interest on savings, clients are charged interest for keeping their money in the bank.
I think there would be a lot of explaining to do by us, of what this means, why we're doing it, and what the benefits of it would be.
Bailey was asked if he'd consider negative interest rates next year. He said he can't comment about future policy decisions.
And the British government has appointed Dame Barbara Woodward as its permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. Woodward is currently the British ambassador to China. She will succeed Karen Pierce, who was assigned as the new British ambassador to the United States. The UK is a founding member of the UN and one of 5 permanent members of its Security Council. 59-year-old Woodward joined the UK's Foreign Office 26 years ago and has previously worked at the UK Embassy in Moscow. And the London Marathon's rescheduled for October the 4th is now an elite-only event. The marathon normally attracts around 40,000 runners and raises millions for charity. This year it will be very different. Elite men, women and wheelchair athletes will battle it out on a fan-restricted circuit. The men's race features Eliud Kipchoge and Kenenisa Bekele. They're the only 2 to have run the marathon in under 2 hours, 2 minutes. Defending champion Kipchoge is seeking a record 5th London title. With Boston, Berlin, New York and Chicago marathons already cancelled, the London race takes on even more importance for the top runners. Charity runners can defer their place to a future London marathon. And 15 families of beavers have been given the right to remain on the River Otter in southern England.
They're the first beavers to live naturally in England in over 400 years. The decision was made by the government after a 5-year study by the Devon Wildlife Trust into beavers' impact on the local environment. British Environment Minister Rebecca Powell says beavers can benefit farming.
If he wants a more diverse habitat to work alongside with our farming and our healthy and sustainable food production, then natural management systems like this that the beavers can provide are one of the answers.
The study allowed the master dam makers to thrive. They've built 28 dams. Other creatures such as fish, insects and birds are benefiting from wetland habitats enhanced by the beavers. Their dams even reduced flood risk to some human homes. Beavers were hunted to extinction in England 400 years ago for their meat, water-resistant pelts and a substance they secrete called castoreum that's used in food, medicine and perfume. Then in 2013, they were found on the River Otter. Now there are at least 50 adults and kits on the river, and they're here to stay.
That's all from us for now. Thanks for watching. Back to New York.
Thanks, Neil. And coming up, classical music by Candlelight. A harpist helps her audience savor classical music in a historic building, and a new kind of performance that's spreading across the globe. And Seth Rogen talks about playing opposite himself in his wild new movie. He says one of the roles linked to his memories of his grandparents. Find out more after the break.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
In China, something can be illegal, but still in common practice. For example, bribery, or intellectual property theft, or Uber.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people and counting. I'm a little freaked out that many people have seen my face.
Hey,
have you heard of China Uncensored? It's starring me.
It's more and more obvious that China is having a major influence on the U.S.
Hey, have you heard of China Uncensored? 中国揭秘.
In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the only show on TV or the internet. It will be the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Have you heard of China Uncensored?
Yeah, I have.
You actually have? He's heard of China Uncensored.
I love China Uncensored.
What does it mean to devote your life to the truth? Does it mean investigating communist subversion here in America? Does it mean exposing the deadly fentanyl crisis in the Midwest? We're spending late nights and covering deep government corruption? Does it mean persevering over 20 years, even after 4 masked men set one of our printing presses on fire last year? Because at a time when America's traditional values are under attack, it's the responsibility of righteous journalists to uphold truth and tradition.
Have you ever been to a classical music concert illuminated only by candlelight? These performances are growing in popularity in cities across the globe. Our France correspondent David Vives met with some of the musicians in Paris.
Imagine being surrounded by hundreds of candles, one arm's length from a musician who's playing for you. These are Candlelight concerts, performances organized by Spanish startup Beaver in major cities across the globe: New York, Rome, Singapore. In Paris, a few steps from the opera, harpist Alexandra Lucianu rehearses her show. In a few moments, she'll perform in the hall of this hotel, built during Napoleon III's reign. It's the first time she'll perform among candlelight. Fever Up France's manager accompanies her.
Our idea is to bring the artist and audience together. We use the standard scenes and stages as little as possible. For this scene design, the artist is in the middle of the hall.
Azerwal says candlelight concerts bring the audience to another level in their experience of classical music. In Paris, these concerts feature famed musicians in churches, hotels, and even cathedrals.
This candlelight idea is to bring back some feelings you had in church with light and shade, or chiaroscuro. It really allows you to merge with the ambience and creates a romantic effect.
According to Azerwal, all concerts are played to a full audience. For most, it's their first classical performance. Before each song, Lucianu talks about what to listen for and how to enjoy the music more deeply. She's happy she can help make classical music more available.
We're going to discover together with the audience how the harp is full of surprise. Music allows you to feel very different feelings, sometimes linked to a memory of a short moment in your life, and it expresses a variety of emotions.
While playing, Luciano suggests that the audience close their eyes to grasp the beauty of the music and its power of relaxation. A moment when time stands still between light and shade. Reporting by David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Seth Rogen stars opposite himself in a new comedy debuting this week on HBO Max. Rogen talked about his dual roles in An American Pickle.
We are the Greenbaums, and we have American dream. I find good job in pickle factory.
Seth Rogen plays dual roles in An American Pickle.
Then one day, everything changed.
It was a challenge. I knew taking on this movie would be different than a lot of things I had done in the past for a lot of reasons.
You were able to track down a great grandson.
Greenbaum. He is shocked at how the barometers for success have changed over the years, which I very much related to in knowing my own grandparents very well and seeing how the fact that I was in movies was not very impressive to them, but the fact that I had like a whole closet full of paper towel rolls was very impressive to them.
I have an idea. It's not big whole business. That's a very stupid idea, Herschel.
If I was just playing Herschel, this would have been probably one of the more challenging roles I had ever done, and coupled with the fact I was playing another character as well, added, not just kind of creative challenges, but logistical ones. It was a wildly technical film to make.
Is this your father? No, that's David Bowie. Is this your mother? No, that's also David Bowie. That whole poster is David Bowie.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
The Chinese consulate in Houston was closed. Documents were burnt. Now 2 shred trucks stand in front of the Chinese consulate in New York. A dozen containers of shredded papers were taken away. Chinese citizens' anger towards authorities is rising. A watermelon farmer's video has gone viral on social media. A Chinese company celebrated the People's Liberation Army's Day with U.S. aircraft carriers. If the U.S. and China were at war, which one would Chinese people support? The U.S. seeks to remove Chinese apps from American app stores and American apps from Chinese phones. The move can be detrimental to Chinese phone makers. And TikTok insists it's clean and has no security risks. But its parent company back home appears to be under the thumb of the Communist Party. Tune in at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time and tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time to watch the full China in Focus.